You might not have years to plan your international move. You might need to leave the country in weeks, maybe a month, and you need to know exactly what to do right now to make sure you're prepared. I've had to do this twice since 2016. Once to beat the Brexit deadline and keep my EU rights, and then again relocating to Portugal in the middle of the pandemic before the borders closed. And both of those times, I had just a matter of weeks to figure everything out. So, if you're looking at your situation right now and thinking that you might need to get out fast in the near future, then this video is your emergency exit plan. I'm going to walk you through exactly what you need to sort out and in what order. And a quick reality check. I'm speaking from my own experience as a person moving without dependents or pets. If you do have kids or pets or other dependents, then the document and financial prep part still applies, but your timeline and complexity is going to be greater. Things like school enrollment, custody considerations, child passport issues, pet quarantine rules, and so on, that's beyond the scope of what I'll cover in this video. But I will aim to cover some of these topics in future videos if there's enough demand. The advice in this video works best for solo movers, couples without kids or pets, or anyone who has the flexibility to make quick decisions. And I'm also assuming that you either work remotely or you're self-employed or have some form of passive income, or you're willing and able to figure out income after landing. If you're tied to a physical office job, then that's something you'll need to solve first. And in the future, I'll make a video on building location independent income. So make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it, because that's a whole different problem. And yeah, it makes a huge difference to everything. So let's start with the things that you need, regardless of your timeline. So first up, we've got what I call the non-negotiables. And whether you're leaving in 2 weeks or 3 months, you will need to handle these things as nothing else works very well without them. So first off, your passport. It needs to have at least 6 months validity from your date of departure, because most countries are not going to let you in if you have less time on your passport. So if your passport is getting close to that 6-month mark, then it's best that you just go ahead and renew it now and start afresh, because passport renewals can take weeks. And obviously, you can't leave the country without having this crucial factor sorted out. And also your driving license. Make sure you keep that current, because you will need it for international driving permits and maybe as a backup ID if needed. If you let it expire before you leave, then you could be creating a whole bunch of new problems that you really don't need. Next up, make sure that your cell phone is unlocked, contract-free preferably, and works internationally. You really don't want to land somewhere and then realize that your phone is locked back to your home network and you can't make a local SIM work in it. I also recommend getting an international credit card with no foreign transaction fees, one that's widely accepted around the world. So this typically means Visa or MasterCard. You should probably avoid American Express, because I've noticed that a lot of places around the world do not accept it. So you do need to pay for things the moment you land without getting absolutely destroyed on fees. And if you're a UK resident, I would recommend the Halifax Clarity MasterCard, which I use myself for years, and it's really, really good, very affordable. In the US, there's the Chase Sapphire Preferred Visa card, which is one of the best options for people who are traveling abroad. Now, another thing to do with finances is setting up a free multi-currency bank account with a service like Wise or Revolut. And make sure it's verified and active, and preferably that you've received the debit card before you leave the country. The verification process does take a bit of time because they need to confirm your identity and your address. So don't leave this till the last minute, because having these things on hand is going to be really, really important for you. I use both Wise and Revolut for different purposes, and having them has been really essential for everywhere that I've lived and traveled. Also, another thing that is a virtual mailbox, which can be really useful for official mail, bank statements, anything requiring an address in your home country. You should also set this up early, because it can take time to activate. Or you could use the address of a friend or family member. That's also an option. But the virtual mailbox lets you be more independent. And especially if that friend or family member also travels, then you're not going to miss any of your mail. Importantly, make sure you set up two-factor authentication on your online accounts, but not relying on SMS to your home country phone number. This can and has caused a problem for me in the past. If you're in a place where the home country phone number doesn't work, or your home network cuts off your roaming, for example, that SMS is going to be a real hassle. So instead, it's best to use something like a service called Authy, or there's Google Authenticator, or a bunch of similar authenticator apps. I can drop some of those links in the description. So if you lose access to your home phone number, your original mobile number, Getting locked out of your bank or email account while abroad is quite a nightmare, and it's something you really don't want to have to deal with. On that note as well, you'll also want to set up a password manager like Bitwarden before you leave, because managing dozens of passwords across different countries and devices without one is asking for trouble. So I like Bitwarden. It costs about $10 a year and is really reliable and easy to use. And while you're at it with the tech stuff, invest in a quality VPN as well, because you may need this for accessing geo-restricted services, for security purposes on public Wi-Fi, and for accessing websites in your home country if needed. And I'll link to my recommended VPN in the description. Importantly, get travel insurance before you decide to leave. Don't do it when you've left the country, because some policies will not cover you once you've already embarked on your trip. So it's best to get this sorted as a matter of priority. And in fact, this is probably up there in importance with making sure your passport is sorted. So yeah, I should have put this further up, really. Another thing I think is really handy is creating a digital document vault by scanning all your important stuff to something like Dropbox or Google Drive. Things like your passport copy, maybe a birth certificate copy, university diplomas, bank statements, tax returns, proof of address, all that stuff. Because you don't want to be carrying a bunch of physical documents with you. They may get lost or stolen. So it's good to have backups accessible from anywhere. And medications. If you're taking prescription medication, then I highly recommend going to your doctor and stocking up on at least a 3-month supply of any medications that you need. Also get a pair of extra glasses or contact lenses if you wear them. I do. And, I couldn't manage without them. And make sure your doctor gives you your prescriptions in writing, because getting prescriptions filled in a new country can take time. And sometimes it can be even almost impossible without having local healthcare registration first. So that's a whole bunch of things that are really important to have locked in case you need to make a quick exit. And I've put together a free checklist of all the non-negotiables I mentioned here, complete with my recommendations from personal experience. And I'll put that link in the description, but you can grab it if you want that. So you can handle most of these things in a single afternoon. Some of them take longer, like passport or driving license renewal. So it's best to check the status of those documents and get that started now, regardless of when you're leaving, so that you're never caught out by surprise. Okay, so once you've got this non-negotiable checklist sorted out, then the bigger question becomes, where are you actually going to go? So I'm not going to list out a whole bunch of countries in this video, because I've done that before in other videos, and every viewer's situation is unique. Instead, I'm going to give you a simple decision framework that I use every single time. You need to start by answering 3 really fundamental questions. First off, you need to figure out where can you legally enter with your passport and stay, and for how long. You should start by checking visa-free entry or visa on arrival situations for your nationality. You'll find that some countries will give you 30 days right off the bat. Some might give you 90, others might give you 180 days. For example, most EU countries will give US and UK citizens 90-day stay with no visa right off the bat. The second thing to consider is, will your current source of income be accessible, and will it work in the place where you're heading? Some countries care if you're working remotely while you're there, and some countries don't allow you to do that, and some don't care at all. Some of them offer digital nomad visas, but they're not always necessary, especially if you're just landing somewhere to figure out your next steps. So it's best to check your target country's policy on remote working, but don't overthink this too much before leaving. You need to land somewhere first, and you can always optimize things later. Third thing to consider is, can you afford to go to this country? You need to seriously consider matching the cost of living to whatever financial runway you currently have. If you're going to be working remotely, then definitely factor in the time zone as well. If you need to be there at 9 a.m. Eastern time for calls with US clients, and you land up in Southeast Asia, then that time zone difference is going to be quite challenging to deal with. So, for example, when I left the UK after Brexit, I had a UK passport, and I was still technically an EU citizen during that transition period. I already had portable income at this time, and I needed to establish EU residency before the deadline. So first of all, I chose Belgium because I was familiar with it. I'd already been there many times before in Brussels. I knew it very well. It was close to London, and I was able to get there quickly, in this case by the Eurostar, by train, to establish myself before the deadline. And then when I later relocated to Portugal during the early days of the pandemic, my situation had changed a bit. I had higher income, more flexibility, and I thought that Portugal made sense as my longer term base. But The key point here is that if I had been traditionally employed and tied to an office job, then I wouldn't have been able to make either of these moves in the first place, which is why having some source of location independent income is so critical for everything I talk about here. Your constraints are going to determine your options. I recommend making a simple spreadsheet or Google Doc with columns for visa length, cost of living, and time zone if that's relevant to you. And you can easily shortlist 3 countries in an afternoon and then pick one based on a bit of research, your gut feeling about it, and flight availability. If you've been there before and you're familiar with it, then so much the better. But don't get paralyzed trying to make the perfect choice, because if you need somewhere to land, that will be the primary goal right now. If you have 2 to 3 months available instead of a couple of weeks, then you can spend more time researching specific long-term visa requirements in more detail, joining international resident Facebook groups for those countries, maybe even doing a scouting trip first. But if you do need to move fast, I recommend keeping it simple and moving on. All right, so let's say you know where you're going, and now let's talk about the process of actually getting out. So leaving fast. Hopefully, you've already got your passport renewed and digital backup sorted out from the non-negotiables section earlier. So depending on where you're going and what you're going to do there, you might need more documents. Things like birth certificates, marriage certificates, if applicable. You need to be getting certified copies of these now. And a certified copy means that an official authority, like a lawyer, has verified that it's a true copy of the original, and then scan them and store them in your digital document vault. And don't wait till you're abroad to try and request these, because it can get really tricky. You might also need to get those certified copies apostilled. Now, an apostille is an additional official stamp that makes your documents legally recognized in other countries. And it's basically a kind of international certification on top of your national certification. Not every country requires them, but many do for residency or work permits or even citizenship. And you can usually get them through your government's Foreign Affairs Office, but it does take time. So if you're moving somewhere that requires apostille documents, then getting them sorted out early can save you weeks of delays and quite a lot of hassle with posting documents back and forth. It's also worth bringing along a recent utility bill or bank statement that shows your current address in your home country. In my experience, some administrative processes, like in Portugal, getting the NIF, the tax number, ask for proof of where you're currently living. And so having something recent to hand can save you a bit of hassle on that front. Next up, let's talk about money, because this is where a lot of people make expensive mistakes. So I recommend moving the money that you need to your international bank account before you announce you're leaving. Like if your bank sees that you've changed your address to a foreign country or told them that you're relocating abroad, they may freeze your account or make international transfers more difficult. So I recommend getting as much money as you think you need into your international accounts like Wise or Revolut while you're still in your country and everything still looks normal. And if you haven't set up an international bank account yet, then I recommend making that a priority. I put Wise and Revolut on the non-negotiables list for a reason. They're really important. You need accounts that are designed to work across borders without charging you crazy extortionate fees every time you access your own money. And your cash strategy matters here too. I usually travel with enough cash to cover at least a week of expenses in the local currency of wherever I'm going, which doesn't mean thousands in cash through airports, but enough as a backup. So if for some reason your cards don't work immediately, you're not completely stuck. And you can usually get better exchange rates when you land anyway. And here's a quick tip that will save you money. When you're using an ATM or paying with a card and it asks you if you want to pay in local currency or convert to your home currency, you should always choose to pay in local currency, because the conversion rates they offer are really crappy and you could lose quite a lot on each transaction. So just let your bank or Wise or Revolut handle the conversion instead. And then when you finally do decide to leave, it's a good idea to make sure you tell your bank that you're traveling internationally, not necessarily relocating at this stage, this early stage, but traveling abroad, because some banks can be overly cautious with fraud protection. I remember it happened to me one time in Jamaica when I decided to go there at the last minute, and my bank obviously flagged it and I wasn't able to use my card for a while. And I had to phone them and all this stuff. So the last thing you need is your account being frozen because they see unusual transaction locations. And you can, in the first instance, let them know about travel dates without necessarily telling them that you're permanently relocating at this stage, because we're still in the very early phase at the moment. So set up your international accounts first, move your money strategically, and let your bank know so they don't freeze your cards. Next up, let's talk about the actual logistics of getting out. So for your flights, whether you book one way or round trip really depends on the visa requirements of where you're going. There are some countries that might not let you in on a one-way ticket because it suggests that you might be planning to overstay. So always check the entry requirements for your destination before you book. If they do need to see onward travel, then you could just book a cheap refundable flight out, or you could use one of those services that creates temporary flight reservations just for visa applications. In terms of packing, just bring what you need for 3 to 6 months and leave everything else behind. I would recommend putting it in storage in a 24/7 unit or with friends and family that you trust. I don't recommend trying to ship belongings internationally until you've landed, gotten settled, and sorted out your residency status, because customs rules vary wildly by country, and getting it wrong can be both expensive and complicated. So pack for your immediate needs, get the rest safely stored, and then figure out shipping later if you decide to, when you actually understand the rules and when you're sure about where you've landed. If you're renting in your home country, then keep in mind that breaking your lease early might cost you. So factor that into your budget if necessary. And if you're a property owner, then resist the urge to panic sell and consider getting a tenant in instead if you need to cover costs. But these situations do need to be handled based on your specific circumstances. It's difficult to give you a one-size-fits-all answer because it depends on your contracts, your country's law, and your personal situation and goals. But in general, try to wrap things up in your home country as cleanly as possible, even when you're stressed, because you might need references later and you might want to return someday. So don't burn all your bridges just because you're in a hurry to leave. Okay, so you've landed in your new country and you've bought yourself some time. So what happens now? Well, if you came in on a tourist visa or visa on arrival or visa-free entry, then you need to be really clear about your options for staying longer if that's going to be your plan. So some countries let you arrive as a tourist and then convert your status to a residence permit once you're there without going back home again. And I've got a video on that, which I'll link to up here. Now, other countries absolutely do not allow this. And in those cases, you would need to leave the country again after your tourist stay expires and apply from outside. And outside is typically that country's embassy in your country of citizenship. So if you're leaving from the US, you may have to go back to the US to apply at, let's say, the Portuguese embassy if you want to get a long-term visa in Portugal. And you should definitely research this in advance and at least before your tourist visa runs out, because missing these deadlines is serious and it can get you banned from re-entering for a long time. In terms of medical cover, your travel insurance will cover you for any emergencies initially in most cases, but it's not really a long-term solution. So another thing to research is the process for accessing local healthcare in your new country. If you're in a country with state healthcare systems, like most of the EU, then you can typically get access to that once you become an official resident. But of course, that might take some time to achieve. And until then, you're going to need your own private health insurance policy. And if there's going to be a long wait before you can get into the state system, then it might be worth taking out a more comprehensive private health cover to bridge the gap. Some countries make it easy to pay out of pocket for basic care, and it's affordable, but others may require you to register in the national healthcare system first. So don't just assume you can walk into a hospital and figure it out when something goes wrong. Now, in terms of accommodation, your first place doesn't need to be perfect. I've made the mistake before of spending weeks trying to find the ideal apartment before I'd even landed. But it's really hard to do that kind of thing remotely from far away. And you also leave yourself vulnerable to potential scammers. So instead, I recommend just booking a short-term rental, an Airbnb, maybe a hostel, whatever gets you there and does the job. And actually, immigrant/expat Facebook groups can be useful places to look for short-term rentals. But watch out for scammers, of course. You can always find better long-term housing once you're on the ground and you actually understand the different neighborhoods and how everything fits together. Keep in mind that you are probably going to be lonely at first, especially if you're making this move on your own. And that's totally normal. You don't have your usual support network. You don't know anyone yet, probably, and everything feels harder and more cumbersome than you might expect. But this is just part of the process of relocating, especially in a hurry. You can do things like join international social groups, go to meetups, try to put yourself out there even when it feels awkward. And it does get easier, but it will take some time. Unfortunately, moving out fast means that you don't always always get the luxury of doing a goodbye tour, of all the places in your home country that you love, or of mentally preparing yourself or easing into the transition. You kind of just go, and that's a lot harder than many people realize. So give yourself permission to feel overwhelmed, because that doesn't mean that you made the wrong choice. And if you have 3 to 6 months to work with instead of a few weeks, then you can handle a lot of this stuff more strategically. You can research digital nomad visas and apply and have that locked in before you leave. You can apply for temporary residence from your home country, and you can speak with a tax advisor about your situation and set up more strategic and well planned out tax arrangements. I do recommend trying to do this anyway. If you really don't have that time, then just focus on landing somewhere safe and legal first, and the other things can normally be figured out once you're there. Moving abroad, especially in a hurry, is hard, expensive, and stressful, and there will be moments when you question if you're doing the right thing. But if you need to leave, you can leave. I've done it twice, and it never gets it any easier, but it's always worth it in the long run. So your action step right now, today, even if you're uncertain about leaving, is to start with your documents. Check your passport expiry date and your driving license, maybe order a new copy of your birth certificate, and definitely set up a Wise or Revolut account. Some of these things take time, and waiting until you're in crisis mode means that you'll be scrambling and you might forget something important. So if you found this video useful, I've got another video here breaking down 10 countries that you can reach as a US citizen in 24 hours and stay long term. So take a look at that if you're interested. And I've also put together the free non-negotiables checklist in the description below, which has links to all the resources that I mentioned, everything you'll need to get set up for a fast exit. And if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Digital Emigrate channel, because I'm going to be covering a lot more topics around international relocation, second citizenship, and building the kind of life that gives you this level of global flexibility. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.